Can you explain what is Web3 and what makes it different from past iterations?
And then Web3 is really doesn't necessarily replace what's come before, but effectively is really about ownership and about getting the community involved in governance, in maybe owning a piece of the protocol by owning a token or an NFT and contributing, to that, the direction that these protocols and these projects go in. There's a ton of controversy around what is Web3, what is its definition, but I think everyone can agree it has something to do with ownership and users contributing to something in that space.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ben, and as usual, I am the host of today's podcast. Today, we have Josh Neuroth, who's the head of product at Anchor Protocol, a Web3 infrastructure company. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Hey, thanks, Ben, for having me. Pleasure to be on here.
Yeah, no problem. So before we get started, right, I always usually like to ask our speakers, before we dive in, tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get started in crypto?
Oh, man. Well, my background, I've been interested in tech all my life. I spent the last decade or so working in various tech roles, predominantly in product. I'm a product manager. I lead product at Anchor as well. Last 8 years or so, I've been working at internet infrastructure, some of the largest infrastructure as a service providers, mostly Web 2 companies, even with some Web 1 companies, have had a passion for seeing, the world connected. I've done some nonprofit work in Madagascar and other places, establishing internet, and then got into crypto really through, I've known about crypto for many years, but started getting involved with Anchor as it is an infrastructure company about 3 years ago now. It's been exactly 3 years. And after 2 years, decided to take the plunge and go full time into Web3 and have never looked back. It's been an amazing journey so far.
Yeah, your experience has, it's obviously very big. And we hear a lot of Web 1, Web 2 terminology. And nowadays, we keep hearing about Web 3 and how it is the new internet. In your own words, can you explain what is Web 3 and what makes it different from past iterations?
Yeah, so I get asked this question a lot by friends and family and people even on the internet. I think about Web 1 is really kind of that era in the early 2000s and late 90s when you maybe were using a dial-up connection, maybe you went to AOL. There's most GeoCities, some of the early blogs where you're just reading information. Web 2 started really with the social networks, started by MySpace, then Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, really defined by uploading like rich media, the read-write, sharing content. And then Web 3 is really doesn't necessarily replace what's come before, but effectively is really about ownership and about getting the community involved in governance, in maybe owning a piece of the protocol by owning a token or an NFT and contributing, to that, the direction that these protocols and these projects go in.
So essentially, like you mentioned, Web 3 is democratizing ownership, right? Into for all users.
Absolutely. And Web3 is kind of pulling in a lot of energy from some movements that have started a long time before the official Web3 terminology kind of came about. I remember hearing about Web3 back when people thought it would be the semantic web. But I think there's a lot of things propelling it. There's, back in 2012, we saw around the world, especially in the United States, there was the Occupy Wall Street movement. That energy is kind of translated into the DeFi space. We've seen right to ownership, right to privacy, people kind of did have a distrust in institutions. They've seen, institutions kind of abuse their power. And so all these things are kind of like funneling energy into Web3. And I think Web3 is definitely a set of technologies, but even more than that, it's become a cultural movement. We've seen celebrities, athletes kind of endorse it, get into it. But more importantly, there's a massive community and a lot of energy behind this new movement.
Yeah, I mean, even the most recent, quite controversial one was Mark Zuckerberg's sister. I think that's a great example.
Yeah. There's a ton of controversy around what is Web3, what is its definition, but I think everyone can agree it has something to do with ownership and users contributing to something in that space.
So this brings me to Anchor, because Anchor is a Web3 infrastructure company. So what is your role within Web3? And how has the vision of Anchor changed, since the white paper was first released in 2017?
Yeah, what's funny, Ben, is someone referred to us as like an OG project the other day. I'm like, hey, we're only 4 years old, but I guess we're like 60% of the age of Ethereum, right? So it's funny how fast things move in crypto and Web3. But Anchor's role, we kind of have this product effectively make it easy to use node infrastructure. And so that can mean primarily for projects and developers, people that are building on the blockchain, they're using Anchor to effectively scale their infrastructure. So we make it easy to use nodes, and we do that through like high performance infrastructure. So I want to point out that like in Web3, anyone can run a node. A node is just an application that runs the blockchain on a server. You can run some on your local machine, your local laptop even. But when you build projects that have thousands of users, millions of users even, you need a very sophisticated technology that is able to scale that infrastructure. And that's exactly what we do. We build a decentralized system that effectively makes it easy to build at scale. And then simultaneously, we also have a staking infrastructure. It's kind of all the chains have moved proof of stake. We've seen that grow. That effectively makes it easy. It's like a one-click staking experience that makes it easy to stake assets in the network and earn rewards through that.
One thing about Web3 infrastructure, right, is that traditionally data architecture and infrastructure are controlled by big enterprises, but Anchor is different. How does Anchor enable even the average Joe to participate in providing or supporting Web3?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think generally there's been this big debate, just like the average people don't want to run servers. And I think that's somewhat true. I could say that developers don't want to run servers, but traditionally, like if AWS, Amazon Web Services is probably the most well-known example. They really popularized kind of cloud as a service. AWS runs all their own servers. They hire a team. Everyone's employed by AWS, right? And they run those servers, and it's almost like a public utility at this point. And it's one of the most common examples out there. What Anchor does is we empower community members to participate in running those nodes. And with Anchor Protocol, you can almost think of it a little bit like a ride sharing service like Uber or Careem, where the service, the app is almost like an aggregator. People bring their own cars to the table, so to speak, kind of help serve traffic, literally, serve rides. It's very similar where providers can run nodes for Anchor Protocol. They earn rewards. They contribute to that global supercomputer that powers all these developers and projects that are building on our infrastructure.
Alchemy, a similar service provider to Anchor, was recently valued at $10 billion. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I think Alchemy's done a great job. They started around the same time as us. They've done a great job being a very focused infrastructure provider. I think one of the things about their valuation that's interesting is that from the valuation point of view, the crypto and the Web3 community don't benefit at all, right? The valuation is exclusively going to the founders, to the team and venture capitalists. And venture capitalists have poured over $1 billion of money into Web3 infrastructure companies in the last year. between Alchemy and competitors. We saw huge raises from Blockdaemon, and others. And so what I think that just is a recognition that this is a very fundamental piece of this is very fundamental to the space, right? And so I often see, I also see a lot of people talking about Chainlink and how Chainlink is a fundamental piece of infrastructure, which it is with price feeds and oracles. That's a piece of infrastructure, but the node infrastructure, like every single project in the space, whether it's a DeFi protocol, a metaverse game, all these things need access to this Web3 infrastructure. And the thing, Ben, that's really been great the last 6 months is we've seen a lot of Web2 companies reaching out and starting to work on their Web3 strategy, and they also need access to this infrastructure.
Yeah, that's kind of in line with what everyone's been saying. The adoption rate is increasing, and now secretly behind the scenes, we have a lot of Web2 companies coming on board.
Yep. Definitely some excitement in the space around that. We've seen, companies like Nike get into this space with NFTs. Yep. We've seen Adobe. All the large banks and financial institutions have a Web3 strategy right now, and they're working with companies and projects like Anchor. So it's great time to be in the space.
Just curious, I'm not sure if this is PNC or not. Could you give us any hints on the type or companies that have approached you so far?
Yeah, definitely. We've got the most interest from big financial institutions, some of the payment providers. They're definitely interested in stable coins, integrating those. And then there's a lot of like traditional companies that I'd say are the more cultured companies that are looking at NFTs right now. We are working with several traditional gaming studios right now on integrating and their games and their kind of metaverse concepts, which has been great to see that evolve. And there's a handful of them that are nearly at launch stage right now, which is going to be great.
Okay, just so you know, CoinGecko users, interesting fact, Chandler Song, the co-founder at Anchor, actually appeared on this podcast in 2020. And that time, he shared a lot about Anchor and its developments, including the launch of Anchor staking platform, Staker, their expansion across different chains, and also their anticipation for ETH 2.0. And now that we have Josh here, we kind of want to get an update, right? What are your new plans or developments are there in the pipeline for Anchor?
Yeah, definitely. Well, since we shared around Staker, which is now called Anchor Earn, we've been able to capture around 600 million of total value locked in staking assets. Between ETH2, we have over 60,000 Ethereum staked now. I think it's like 800,000 BNB. And then we've just started with Avalanche and Polygon and Phantom. So it's great to see traction around that. Liquid staking is starting to take off. We were actually first to market around our liquid staking back in 2020 and saw great results around that. And so looking forward, we're doubling down on our focus. I think for a long time, you asked me earlier about how our plans have changed since 2017 and even 2020. The infrastructure space is very key. We definitely will continue working on our staking platform and with lots of great features and integrations on that. We're working on an institutional play right now. We have many of those large financial institutions, traditional financial institutions are looking at staking right now, which is great. That does produce revenue for Anchor. And also, the infrastructure space is growing incredible. We saw 20x growth in 2021 across our traffic, and we're expecting to see similar numbers this year compounding. So it's time to double down on our strategy. The biggest thing that I think the community will be excited about is the integration of the Anchor token into our products this year. And so we have a big plan around launching Anchor staking, bringing very high APR to our token holders and incorporating them into like the decentralized government. So that's a big focus for us. Our entire team is working very hard on that.
That's cool. Recently, I've also heard about the Anchor Bridge, and there's also some talk on some data centers that Anchor is trying to work with. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, the Anchor Bridge is for our liquid staking tokens. I think bridges are a little controversial right now. Our bridge is limited to just the liquid staking tokens, so we can more easily secure it in that sense. It's basically just it makes using our liquid staking tokens easier because you can move them from like Ethereum to Polygon and vice versa. In terms of the data center partners, I think, one of the things we've seen, as I mentioned earlier, our traffic has had this insane growth, and we've seen incredible adoption all over the world in DeFi. And as an infrastructure provider, we need to make sure that our nodes and our servers are all around the world, that there's global distribution as well as decentralization. And so if you think about this, Ben, like a great example is that, when you're using airplane Wi-Fi, you try to load like a web page, often that web page will time out, or
Yep.
it might be slow to launch. And so in very developed countries in Europe, in the United States, like the infrastructure is pretty good, but we are putting infrastructure all over the world in places like Argentina, South Africa, in India, etc. And that is helping improve the user experience that users are having. And so just like I said, with airplane Wi-Fi, the experience gets faster. Transactions can process faster and have less delay. And then it makes effectively the DeFi protocols that are integrating on Anchor infrastructure much, much better. And so that's kind of what we're doing with our data center partners, is effectively helping get nodes all over the world and then build a decentralized network with that.
A note on that, so I guess one of the core tenets of Web3 is decentralization. But if more users start to rely on services like Anchor, doesn't that just eventually make Anchor the Google or Amazon of Web3?
I think we talked about Alchemy earlier. I think this is one of the core criticisms of Alchemy, is that it is centralized. They do build exclusively on AWS, as far as I understand. That's kind of why we talk about these node providers. And we're enabling node providers because we want to maintain the decentralization. We want to involve the community. We want not only different data centers being used, but also people that own and operate the nodes. Some of the nodes, like in fact, a lot of them now in Anchor protocol that are serving traffic, like we don't have access to those nodes. They've attached themselves to the network. They're serving traffic. We're building kind of risk mitigation and all that, and a slashing mechanism. But that's kind of interesting. To take a step back, I think some of the maybe podcast listeners today are familiar with staking and how you stake to a validator. We're kind of effectively there's another type of node called a full node or a developer node. That's what all these projects need to access infrastructure. We're bringing staking to full nodes, and we're doing that through the Anchor token. And so we're effectively like the first protocol that has done that, surprisingly. Like literally no one else has done it. And that's how we're going to maintain kind of this decentralization, this compute capacity.
Great. And like you mentioned, Anchor works a lot with nodes as part of your service. And I'm curious, how has the node industry developed over the last few years? Are there any interesting figures or statistics that you can share?
Well, yeah. I mean, so like I think Ethereum 2 is a great example with Beacon Chain. There's like almost 300,000 validators as of March 2022. When Chandler was on this podcast last time, I think there was only like a couple dozen. So, wow. People are running nodes. And like what I love about this space is that there's so many people that don't know how to do like Solidity development or some of the blockchain development. They're not programmers, but they can learn to run a node. So I have many friends that have come into the space. They've had economic opportunities because they've ran validators. They've just learned like simple Linux commands and how to like set up a server and run these validators. And they've earned a lot of money and a lot of crypto, doing that. And so that's an exciting thing. And, it's a great, we talk about how to get involved in Web3. You can contribute to a DAO, maybe do some copywriting, maybe some project management, but you can also run nodes. You can run nodes for Anchor protocol. You can run nodes for many of the emerging chains as well. And it's a great way to get involved if you're not a programmer. So that would be my advice to the community. And we've seen tremendous adoption around that and excitement around that. So great things ahead.
Well, what I really like about the discussion so far is that a lot of it has been on how many people, even normies like myself who can't program, can come in and bring it point into perspective. There has been this ongoing debate on crypto Twitter, essentially, where there is a generational divide for Web3 users, right? Web3 as a whole can be intimidating for anyone, but especially so for older or slash non-tech folks. First of all, what are your thoughts on the user experience for Web3 in general? And should we focus on building with every type of user in mind?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think, when we just talked about decentralization. I think centralized exchanges like Coinbase have done a tremendous job helping build user-friendly products that have effectively made it easy for people like my parents to get into crypto. Binance has some great features as well on that side. And, platforms like OpenSea get criticism for being centralized, even though they support Wallet Connect and, connecting your wallet. But ultimately, like something the space is kind of figuring out right now is how to build how do you build a decentralized product? It's not easy. Oftentimes the best products are done by like very small focused teams that are, if you think about like a Steve Jobs kind of person and like, in a small design studio, really inventing the next big thing. Right. So I think that like one of the models I've seen work so far is to build a centralized product, build a great service, and then begin decentralizing it. And so we've seen with many of the protocols, it was centralized in the beginning, and then they've started a DAO, and they started turning over key pieces of governance and kind of maintenance to the community and getting the community engaged. So I think what's great about Web3 is that there's there really aren't any gatekeepers. Like you can start on a centralized platform like Coinbase and then slowly kind of move off into DeFi as you get more comfortable with it. I do want to say like to the community that there's a great way to do that. And I think early on in crypto, I challenged myself. I wrote down like 5 to 10 things I was going to do in DeFi. And I put like $20 US worth of crypto. And I said, you know what, if I lose these funds, it's fine. It's going to be a learning experience for me. And I started moving the assets around, playing with some liquidity pools. Of course, there's like high gas fees and whatnot, but that really like made me feel comfortable with DeFi and getting into the space. And I would recommend anyone in the community do that. Set aside some funds, what you can afford to lose, and just start playing around and learning the space.
That's actually great advice. I myself did the same thing before getting in. And you have to lose money to learn. It's essentially your tuition fee, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And you can still keep your main assets on an exchange or a hardware wallet, but it's definitely good to just get familiar and start playing around.
My next question is for, just kind of to round up the session, what are your predictions for the Web3 infrastructure ecosystem in the future?
Yeah, man. Well, I'll make a controversial one right now and say that I think that Ethereum will flip Bitcoin eventually.
Okay.
I know I think that, I definitely am a huge fan of Bitcoin. I believe in it. I believe in sound money, but I think with the innovation surrounding like the layer 2s right now on Ethereum, like Polygon and Arbitrum, and, Ethereum's kind of becoming like this trusted layer. And it's also, with some of the newer updates, it's becoming deflationary. And so we've seen in our world, because of the pandemic, all these governments all over the world are printing money at the exact same time. There's a lot of capital in the markets, and with Ethereum becoming deflationary and also having a lot of utility, I just think it's a matter of time before it flips Bitcoin. Might not happen this year, but certainly next, if not this year.
What are your thoughts, on other chains beside Ethereum, like Avalanche, Solana, etc.?
Yeah, well, I think I don't think there's an Ethereum killer. What we've seen is that multi-chain adoption, there's so many, the world is a big place and there's so many crypto users, and Avalanche has its own little ecosystem that's growing very fast. So does Solana, and they have very passionate communities, and those communities are unlikely unless there's some major like controversy or hack or something. Those communities are very like resilient and are going to keep building on those chains. So I'm kind of like a multi-chain maximalist, whatever you want to call it. Like I think I would think of it very similar to like a programming language where, how many programming languages does the world need? As many as people are passionate about, and so Developers can pick the right chain that works for them, and definitely we've seen a lot of advancements in the multi-chain space and cross-chain bridges, making that experience easier. So I don't think there's an ETH killer. I think all these chains can coexist, and they're going to be used for different purposes. Like, Ethereum is the most decentralized, has the most trust because of that. Solana, on the other hand, it's very fast. It has a lot of utility, but it's more centralized. So, people can pick kind of the level of decentralization that works for them in their application.
In your opinion, there are not really any Ethereum killers because the world is big enough. But what do you think of Web 2? Is Web 3 a Web 2 killer? Or can they coexist?
I think right now they'll coexist. It's I think a great, for anyone that's familiar with kind of software out there, you can find like open source versions of a lot of software. Like Photoshop is made by Adobe, and then there's a tool called GIMP that's like an open source photo editor. I think a lot of these, like Web3 will coexist with Web2, and it'll be up to there's different trade-offs, right? That the community can experience. And so I do think though that more and more Web2 will start adopting kind of key tenets of Web3. I think it makes so much sense for this. If you think about it, you've seen these DApps and decentralized applications where you can connect your wallet. It's kind of like a single sign-on, for the whole space. And I think more and more banks, more and more applications will support a Wallet Connect. And long term, maybe that Wallet Connect looks less like a wallet and more just like our data that we can kind of move with us and disconnect it from applications when we don't want to use those applications anymore. So, that's exciting. I think ultimately, though, what I'm most excited about is that, Web3 is good for the open web. And for many years now, we haven't seen as much innovation happen on the web. We've seen a lot of things happen in kind of centralized platforms that are walled gardens like Facebook and Google to some extent. But, Web3 is going to put a lot of capital into the open web, and that's good for people. That's good for, the market. It's good for, to democracy and democratic principles. So definitely excited about that.
Awesome. And just to round off the podcast, are there any last thoughts or advice or anything at all that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always going to vouch for Anchor. I think, Anchor is going places this year. We're in a great space. The thing about infrastructure, Ben, is that it's not really a flash in the pan, so to speak. There's not a lot of hype around infrastructure. It's not that sexy, but it grows over time, and it's almost like a snowball effect. And that's exactly what we've seen with Anchor. So I think it's an exciting protocol to be involved with, and definitely would invite the community to follow us on our social media and get involved in our community.
Yeah, I mean, coming from CoinGecko as well, we perfectly understand the appeal of infrastructure. So
yes.
I think that's about it. Thank you so much, Josh, for coming on and sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, love it. I do want to say, you told me earlier that you're taking this podcast from Malaysia. We are putting nodes in Malaysia soon. So we've seen a lot of growth in Malaysia. Yeah, we got some in Singapore already, but definitely going into places like Malaysia and Indonesia. So definitely want to engage community all over the world on node running and node providing.
Great. You heard it here, folks. Everyone take care and stay safe. Thank you so much, Josh.
Thank you.
For the latest crypto prices, visit our website. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep up to date on the latest crypto trends.